By late 1942, the Eastern Front had consumed millions of lives and vast stretches of territory. The war had degenerated into a brutal, grinding war of attrition, focused on the hellscape of ruined cities like Stalingrad and the vast, featureless, wine-swept steppes. On this massive, fluid battlefield, intelligence was not just lifeblood, it was the single most valuable commodity. But conventional reconnaissance was a suicide mission. Fast-moving German Focke-Wulf 190s, piloted by aces with hundreds of kills, tore Soviet scout planes from the sky, and the ubiquitous German flak batteries, from 20 millimeters to the dreaded 88s, created a lethal curtain of steel that was impossible to fly through. The front was too vast to be mapped, the German rear areas too deep to be penetrated. Stavka, the Soviet high command, was desperate. They were moving entire armies based on partisan rumors and educated guesses. They needed a new, undetectable eye, a technological advantage in a war that was being lost in the margins of maps. It was from this desperation that a small, highly secretive scientific military unit, buried deep within the Arctic Circle, began to explore a daring, almost fantastical alternative: high-altitude reconnaissance balloons. This was Operation Snowhawk. These were not the flimsy, fabric-covered observation balloons of the Great War, tethered to the ground like sitting ducks for any passing fighter. These were the secret forefathers of the space program, a project born of equal parts genius and desperation. They were cutting-edge, hydrogen-filled giants, constructed from advanced, multi-layered synthetic materials, fabrics coated in rubber and aluminum. Designed to withstand the brutal, unknown conditions of the stratosphere, the engineers had to guess, to extrapolate from limited data, what would happen to these materials at 60,000 feet, where the temperature was a constant minus 60 degrees Celsius and the air was a near vacuum, equipped with specially adapted, low-light, multi-lens cameras that could capture stereoscopic images, and experimental long-range radio equipment. Their purpose was to drift silently and invisibly over German lines. They were designed to float far above the ceiling of any Luftwaffe fighter, far beyond the reach of flak, capturing invaluable photographic intelligence that traditional air assets couldn't acquire. The program was fraught with peril, from the inherent, massive danger of the highly explosive hydrogen gas to the unknown, terrifying physiological effects of extreme altitude. Attached beneath these colossal, straining envelopes by a web of reinforced cables was a tiny, pressurized gondola, spherical, cramped capsule barely large enough for one man and his equipment. It was a metal womb, a tiny bubble of life in the dead of space, packed with rudimentary oxygen scrubbers, heating coils, and row upon row of flickering gauges. This was the domain of the Snowhawks, a select group of pilots and scientists chosen for their unique blend of aeronautical skill, scientific acumen, and, most importantly, their unflappable nerve and psychological resilience to total, crushing solitude. The psychological screening was as intense as the physical. Any hint of claustrophobia, any fear of isolation, and the candidate was washed out. They would ascend for hours, far beyond the clouds, into a realm of deep, endless black sky and dazzling, indifferent stars, becoming living satellites for the motherland. It was a mission of profound, terrifying loneliness and immense strategic importance, pushing the absolute boundaries of human endurance and aerospace technology. One such pilot was Lieutenant Ivan Volkov. He was not a wide-eyed recruit. He was a veteran reconnaissance pilot, a man who had flown dozens of low-level missions in a flimsy Polikarpov R-5, dodging trees and power lines to photograph German tank formations. But his flying days were supposed to be over. A 20mm cannon shell from a Messerschmitt had shattered his leg and his aircraft, grounding him permanently. He now walked with a pronounced, painful limp. His meticulous attention to detail, his extraordinary patience, and his uncanny ability to read terrain from altitude made him an ideal candidate for Operation Snowhawk. For Volkov, a quiet, intense man who lived to fly, the chance to return to the skies, even in this unorthodox, unmanned and spirit craft, was a desperate lifeline. He would be a passenger of the winds, but he would be in the sky. He saw the potential, the absolute, undeniable strategic value of these silent sentinels. Despite the immense personal risk involved, he would be the first to fly a manned mission over hostile territory. Volkov's first mission in the Snowhawk Alpha was scheduled for a clear, cold night in October 1942. The launch was a meticulous, tense ballet of engineers and technicians. The immense balloon tethered and straining against the Arctic wind, groaning like a living creature. He went through the pre-flight check, a list of over 100 items, his voice a low monotone over the intercom, as he sealed himself into the cramped gondola. The heavy, insulated hatch locking with a final, metallic thunk, the world shrank to the size of his tiny, instrument-lit sphere. The hum of the oxygen pumps and the hiss of the hydrogen envelope filling was the only sound. He was bolted in. The tethers were cut, and the ascent was eerily silent, a gentle, inexorable, and perfectly smooth climb into the darkness. He left the world of raging war, the sounds of artillery, and the lights of his own base far below. The earth curved away, a patchwork of white and black, and then the stars erupted into a dazzling, indifferent display, brighter than he had ever imagined. Hours passed. Volkov drifted silently at 60,000 feet, a ghost in the stratosphere, far above the highest flak and the fastest German fighters. The temperature outside the gondola plummeted to -60 degrees Celsius, but inside, a delicate balance of experimental heating systems and his own pressurized suit kept him alive, his breath fogging the small porthole. He peered through his optical viewer, a complex Zeiss lens captured from the Germans and repurposed for this mission. He began his work. He meticulously took photographs, the camera's automated click were the only sound. He was mapping German supply lines, railway junctions, and troop concentrations around the periphery of Stalingrad. He could see the entire front, a spiderweb of tiny, moving lights and puffs of smoke. He was a god in the sky, an unheard whisper in the grand symphony of war. And the intelligence he was gathering could change the course of the battle, and therefore the war. Then the unimaginable happened, a sudden violent updraft, an anomaly of stratospheric weather not yet understood by 1940s science. A jet stream slammed into the balloon. The gondola bucked wildly, throwing Volkov against his restraints, the impact so sharp it nearly broke his ribs. Instruments screamed, and the delicate equilibrium of the balloon's flight was shattered. He was no longer drifting slowly and predictably. He was being pulled, dragged by an invisible, screaming river of wind at over 150 miles per hour. Volkov fought to regain control, to vent hydrogen and descend, but the valves were frozen solid. He was helpless, a passenger of the wind. The balloon, a colossal leaf in an invisible hurricane, began to drift erratically, violently westward. Radio contact with his ground crew, already tenuous, was severed, replaced by a wall of shrieking static. He was alone. The wind currents carried him westward, relentlessly, agonizingly. Over hundreds of miles in just a few hours, he was a prisoner of the wind, a tiny mote of metal and fabric being hurled across the world. He was no longer over the battlefields of Russia, but deep within German-occupied territory. As the sun rose, he looked down in horror. He saw the orderly, unfamiliar patterns of Polish farmsteads. He saw railway junctions teeming with German military transports. He could make out the insignia of a panzer division on the side of a train car. He was drifting precariously towards the heart of the Third Reich itself. The intelligence he was gathering was now a curse. He was a Soviet pilot in a top-secret experimental craft about to land in the enemy's backyard. His mission of observation had transformed into a desperate fight for survival. With his oxygen supply dwindling and the balloon's structural integrity compromised by the storm, Volkov knew he had to descend. He could not float forever. He had to get the film to the ground, and himself with it. He took his flare gun and, in a desperate, last-ditch gamble, fired a single flare up into the envelope, hoping to burn a small hole to vent the gas. A terrifying risk with a balloon full of hydrogen. It worked, but too well. The gas began to vent, but the hole was large and tearing. The descent was faster than expected. A stomach-lurching, whizzing plunged through layers of cloud and increasingly turbulent air. He burst through the cloud base at 10,000 feet into a world of towering, dark pine forests and snow-covered hills. He was no longer a silent, invisible sentinel. He was now a massive, silvery, and highly visible target, a perfect bullseye for any German patrol or Luftwaffe fighter in the area. The landing was brutal. The massive balloon, now deflating rapidly, snagged on the highest pines, tearing through the branches with a sound like a locomotive ripping through a forest. The gondola swung like a pendulum, slamming into tree trunks. Before the balloon finally ripped open and collapsed, the capsule plummeted the last 100 feet, slamming into the deep snow, burying itself in a drift, and then bouncing, finally coming to rest against a thick tree trunk. With a sickening, metallic crunch, Volkov, battered, bruised, and his arm broken, but miraculously alive, fought the hatch. He unsealed it, the pressurized air hissing out, and stepped out into a world of crushing, cold silence. He was surrounded by an endless, alien forest, deep behind enemy lines. He was hundreds of miles from safety. His training kicked in, overriding the pain and the panic. He was no longer a pilot. He was an intelligence operative. His first priority was to destroy the sensitive equipment, the radio, the altimeters, the pressurization system. He smashed them with the butt of his pistol. His second was to salvage what mattered, the precious camera, its film magazines now filled with priceless intelligence, a small PPSH-41 submachine gun, a pistol, a map, and his meager rations. His third, and most critical, task was to hide the evidence. He knew he would be hunted. He spent hours, his broken arm screaming in protest, meticulously burying and camouflaging the crash site with snow and pine branches. He knew that the slightest trace, a single scrap of silvery fabric, could lead the Germans directly to him. The cold was biting, the silence oppressive. Every snapping twig sounded like the bolt of a Mauser rifle. Volkov began his impossible journey. His map, though detailed, showed hundreds of miles of German-occupied Poland and Belarus between him and the Eastern Front. He was one man injured, in a hostile land that was teeming with Wehrmacht patrols, SS units, and Gestapo agents. He moved only at night, a ghost in the woods, navigating by the stars and a small, salvaged compass. During the day, he buried himself in snowdrifts or hid beneath dense evergreen branches, enduring the agonizing, numbing cold and the gnawing hunger. He ate frozen berries and chewed on pine needles for sustenance. He was driven by two things: the need to deliver the intelligence he carried, and the primal, stubborn urge to survive. He was a silent shadow, a ghost moving east, one painful, frozen step at a time. Days blurred into an endless, agonizing struggle. He narrowly avoided German patrols, once hiding for hours in a frozen, hollowed-out log as a column of trucks and half-tracks, filled with laughing German soldiers, rumbled past just yards away. Another time, he scavenged frozen, rotten potatoes from an abandoned farm, barely escaping detection by a barking dog that alerted a nearby sentry. He was forced to kill the dog with his knife, a brutal act that haunted him but was necessary for survival. He moved through forests, over frozen rivers, and across desolate, snow-covered fields, his body aching, his frostbite worsening. The intelligence he carried felt heavier with each passing mile, a burden that was also his only beacon. It was a reason to keep moving, a reason to not lie down in the snow and let the freezing, peaceful sleep take him. His biggest obstacle was a wide, frozen river, a natural barrier he knew would be heavily patrolled. He waited for 2 days, scouting, freezing, watching the German patrols move back and forth on a distant bridge. He knew he couldn't cross. There, he would have to risk the ice. He waited for a swirling, afternoon blizzard to provide cover, then made his move. Crawling on his belly, his gun slung on his back, he slid across the treacherous, cracking ice. The howling wind masked the sounds of his movement. He was almost across when a crack echoed like a rifle shot beneath him. The ice fractured, and he plunged into the freezing, black, rushing water. The shock was like a physical blow. Stealing his breath, he lost his grip on his submachine gun, which sank instantly into the dark. The shock of the -30-degree water was like a physical blow, stealing his breath. But he was a man driven by an iron will. He clawed his way out. His pistol and the precious film canisters, still secure, his clothes instantly freezing into a solid, heavy shell. He was a dead man walking. He staggered, delirious, hallucinating from hypothermia and exhaustion, moving on pure, animal instinct. He thought he heard wolves. He thought he saw his wife. Then, through the howl of the wind, he heard it a distant, familiar sound, the thump-thump-thump of Soviet artillery, not German-Soviet. He stumbled through the final, skeletal tree line and saw it, a small, frozen, crude Soviet forward outpost. He collapsed, clutching his camera. Lieutenant Ivan Volkov, the immortal Snowhawk, had returned, bringing with him not just himself, but invaluable intelligence, a testament to an impossible journey, and the indomitable will to survive. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, hit the like button and subscribe for more daily content.